way to begin summer, to be here at the Institute of Politics. Neil Levesque, I think, is still here, roaming around. We thank him for opening up his home here to the New England Council for our event here this morning. A fireside chat with a distinguished member of Congress. We also have some very distinguished guests here. You know who you are. But we'll start off by at least acknowledging Bernadette Jordan is here. The Canadian Consul General for New England is here. We welcome her. And a former colleague of yours that served with distinction, and we had great pride in his leadership in Congress back when it was a functioning body, and that's former Congressman Michael Harrington here from Massachusetts. And also someone who has been on the ballot since 1972 and has been very, very successful in public service, but more importantly, has given over 50 years of his life to public service. And many of you know that Lou D'Alessandro is here, and we are going to have a fireside chat with the senator on August 5th to talk about his career and how the business has changed, to say the least. I was hoping that he would serve one more term for the pension, but he said no. He said no. This is it, Jim. So with that, I just want to thank BAE. We were waiting for you, Tom Bishop, to come here to personally say thank you to BAE for once again sponsoring our event here this morning. We all know that the BAE is a giant here in the Granite State, and being a community leader as well as a very, very successful company here. And I know that I speak for so many people. They're blessed that they've chosen the Granite State to make their business. So with that, our guest needs very little introduction, to say the least. But just for the few people who walked in late who are saying, who is she? Let me just tell you that Representative Kuster is now in her 6th term, having announced just a few months ago that she would not run for re-election this fall, and that she will retire from Congress at the end of the year. She's not retiring. She's retiring from the United States Congress. And needless to say, she has been a tremendous advocate. I spoke to Congressman Richie Neal just recently and told him that Annie would be speaking, and he said she was a star. She was really somebody that brought people together. She's been a tremendous advocate, not just for the Granite State, and really not just for the region, but for our country. She has been a tremendous champion for expanding access to behavioral health services, as well as resources for the prevention and treatment of substance misuse disorder. She's the co-chair of the Bipartisan Addiction and Mental Health Task Force, which she co-founded with a former member of Congress from the 1st Congressional District here, former Congressman Frank Ginter. And she has done a terrific job there. She's also a longtime member of the New Democrat Coalition. And she not only is affiliated with it, she has been nominated by her colleagues to be the chair. For those of you who are not familiar with the New Democrats, it's a coalition of, I think, nearly 100 common sense Democrats working to break through the partisan gridlock and get things done for the American people. And this fall, she will add one more line to the impressive resume. While this has not been formally announced, we'll keep it just between all of us here in this room, a little secret. In September, the Congresswoman will be honored as a New Englander of the Year at our 2024 annual celebration. I told the Congresswoman it was late that night, third ballot, and I said, look, you may have issues, we all have issues maybe in there, but she's worthy of it, and wrath was the deciding vote. held back, but decided vote was wrath. So with that, maybe we could just talk a little bit about reflection, but also talk about what you think is going to happen in the next couple of months. You're not retiring till the end of the year. Still 6 months to go. The work to be done, 118th Congress. Are you realistic about some opportunities for the National Defense Authorization Act, the Farm Bill, or any other meaningful legislation passing this year?
Yes. Maybe not before the election, but we have a lame duck. So we're in a very challenging state, as everyone knows. But the rank and file are still hard at work. So I would add to your list the Privacy Act. I serve on Energy and Commerce, and my chair and co-chair, Kathy McMorris Rogers and Frank Pallone, have come together at the end of last week with a privacy bill. This is around technology, around the impact of technology and social media on our youth, which is having, some might say, a devastating impact on the next generation of your workers, of our children. But there's a major but. In our committee, we still work on a bipartisan basis. We marked up, I think, 24 bills just 2 weeks ago. Speaker Johnson has announced to our chair that he will not bring any bipartisan bills to the floor before the election. And frankly, I think that's a good reason why she's leaving. I think it's sort of symbolic of the whole situation that we find ourselves in. But having said that, I believe that if we work hard enough, the outcome of the election will be clear, and we can get back to work on a number of these bills that are critical. The NDAA, for BAE, for jobs, for our security. That's the National Defense Authorization, and it's everything that we do to keep our country safe, to keep the world safe, to protect democracy around the globe. And the committee agreed on the bill, but then they add to it these poison pill amendments. And some of them, frankly, are just mean-spirited, and some of them are just culture war issues. One that I'm particularly concerned about, I've done a lot of work on sexual assault and sexual assault in the military. And, we have unintended pregnancies from rape of our service members. And now they're adding amendments that they cannot travel to a state where they can terminate the pregnancy. I mean, this is going to impact our readiness. This has gone too far in terms of a culture war issue. Another example I'll give you is that broadband. We had a program, this is a minor aside, but it's instructive, called the Affordable Connectivity Program during COVID, so that people could get access to broadband for work. Think of your companies, if your people couldn't do the work that they needed to do, for education, for our kids. We were frantically trying to hook up families so that kids wouldn't have to leave school. For telehealth, those of you in the healthcare field, if we hadn't had telehealth. And so those continue, and they're important for our workforce, for our communities, for the quality of life, for our kids. So that program expired at the end of the emergency. 23 million Americans are set to lose access to broadband communication. We want to continue it because it's been so successful, and the Republicans don't want to put this, they don't want to move it. Well, it turns out this is going to impact our forces because we are below level for our recruitment. And think of those 23 million people who can't afford broadband are the very people that we're recruiting to go in the military and turn their life around and keep us safe. So there's so many solutions to be had, but if you just throw up your hands and say we're not going to do anything bipartisan until November, It's a very challenging environment. I will say it that way. But on the other hand, I think we get through the election, and I think we'll have one of the most productive lame duck sessions ever. And we'll get all of this done because we have to. It's important work. And the last one you mentioned, the budget, I think we'll have a continuing resolution. I hope we don't have a shutdown, but there are clearly members of Congress that would be fine with a shutdown. And then again, coming back after the lame duck, get the budget for the following year. I think last year it took us until, April, May of the September 30? Yeah.
I mean, you've been such a champion on mental health and substance abuse. In fact, last year you joined your colleague here, Senator Maggie Hassan, at the other end of to talk about behavioral health. And what do you see happening in the next 6 months and maybe in the next Congress to expand, mental and behavioral health services?
We've done a lot. And what's interesting looking back on 12 years, and thank you for the introduction and the bipartisanship. You know the story. I was raised in a Republican family, worked in a Republican office, and always looked for opportunities. And one of the most successful things was working, starting with Frank Ginta, but then continuing every 2 years. We're now up to 140 members in our bipartisan mental health and addiction task force. I think I do best on issues where there's nobody on the other side. 25 years in government relations, I know how to pick the issues. There's no heroin lobby. Nobody's paying the heroin lobbyists. But it turns out it's a very intractable issue. It turns out it's very, very difficult. And if any of you have family members dealing with it, as I do, you can't imagine the complications. I am very proud to say that we have been very successful passing bipartisan legislation every term. I can remember back to, it doesn't matter who was the speaker, it doesn't matter who was in charge. Every time we would have at least a week or more of bipartisan bills to cover everything, to cover prevention, to cover recovery, to cover treatment, to cover housing, to cover are working to stop fentanyl at the border, working with law enforcement, with the DEA. And I think that will continue. I'm very excited to report that we had a tough time during COVID. A lot of people could not keep up their recovery, but for the very first time, rates are coming down considerably here in New Hampshire and across the country. 25 to 35% drop in overdoses and in deaths. And that's in large part because of the decisions that we made about access to, in particular, Narcan. Nobody should have to die of an overdose. We have a medication that works, and getting that out into the community. And then trying to catch this upstream, trying to catch the mental health and trauma that goes into addiction. The story I tell is a visit that I had to the women's prison right before COVID. 100% of the inmates, I like to call them patients at the women's prison, are survivors of 75% sexual assault and 25% abuse and neglect in their childhood. Not a single person woke up in the morning and said, I think a life of crime is going to be the way to go. They ended up with bad boyfriends or people dealing drugs or them getting hooked on drugs and whatever it took to get the next fix. And there they are. And they're mothers and neighbors and employees. And we need them back. We're down to 2.6% unemployment here, one of the lowest in the country. We need able-bodied people to be able to function in our society, in our community, and in our companies. And so that was probably my number one issue, and it's really gratifying, even a tough issue, to see some progress.
In May of this year, the state of New Hampshire received $30 million in housing affordability. Can you touch on how you think that's going to be distributed?
So it raises the point, Jim was asking, me to think about highlights, and you go back 12 years, but one of the highlights is the federal funding that we've brought to the state, and I'm really, really proud of that. When I went down there, we haven't done the number crunching to be able to brag on it yet, but I always said when I was running, we send more than $1 to, when you send $1 in taxes to DC, I want to get more than $1 back. And New Hampshire was always a donor state. And now we've gotten considerable funding, obviously on infrastructure, clean energy, but housing and childcare are the two intractable issues that we have to solve in the next decade. And housing, you know the story, we're at 0.1% vacancy. We should be at 5% vacancy, and you just can't find a place anywhere. The prices are just skyrocketing. For those of us in our generation with our low interest rate mortgages and our equity building, that's awesome. But for anyone else trying to come to the state, it's a huge challenge. And for our own kids moving here or living here or trying to get started here. So $30 million, $20 million will go into new affordable housing. And if you live in the southern tier, you've already started to see this. Nashua is just gangbusters with hundreds of units that are workforce housing, some of it affordable housing. Salem, you know, the whole Rockingham, Tuscan village, that it's unbelievable, the number of units there. And they did affordable housing down the street as part of that agreement with Salem, which I think is a really smart way. Those of you serving on town committees, I think that's a really smart way to do it, to require the builder to do some affordable housing. We've done it up north. It's my favorite thing, visiting housing projects. I get all excited about these beautiful new kitchens, but everywhere, Hanover, Lebanon, Bethlehem, Berlin, you know, everywhere we go, it's trying to just increase the housing stock. And so a lot of the grant money that we bring in is around that. And then $10 million will go to improvements to the current affordable housing stock. And that can make a huge difference. I remember a project up in Berlin, up on the mountain. I kept saying, those are unbelievable views. This could be all condos. Imagine the tax revenue you'd get here. But anyway, it's a beautiful affordable housing neighborhood that was really down on its luck. And it's amazing what just a renovation could do. Clean things up, get them fixed up, and people were really happy there. And I'll just tell a quick story down in Nashua. This little child that had been living in what they called the projects, and he had never, ever invited anybody home from school because he was embarrassed. And when he moved into these beautiful high-rises in downtown Nashua, he was so excited to invite the kids to come over to his house after school. And he said, we have an elevator. And just imagine the self-esteem. Imagine, you know, as I keep looking out at you all, these are your employees. These are your next generation of employees. If any of your companies or nonprofits want to be successful and continue the quality of life that we've had here, we've been having this conversation about raising our kids in Amherst and Hopkinton and playing Little League and playing, and I want everybody to have that. I want every child to have that. So,
you mentioned about childcare, and I know you've been working closely with the whip, Catherine Clark, on childcare. How optimistic are you that you'll see progress?
Yeah, we have to. We have to. So we have a joke about this, Catherine Clark. My roommate for 10 years, who is now, you're going to see more and more of her because when we do win back the House in November, Hakeem Jeffries will be our new speaker and Catherine Clark will be our majority leader. Right now she's our whip and she's been the lead on the child care issue. And listen, it was one of the things that got left on the cutting room floor by Joe Manchin, actually. It would have been in the infrastructure and in the IRA. And it's funny because it's like revisiting the last 35 years of my life. Joe Manchin said that's a personal issue. And it has been a personal issue for those of us of my generation that were careening out of the law firm at 5:15, trying to pick my kids up by 5:30 with their faces jammed against the window, convinced I'd never come. One time I stayed late, Brad picked them up, I went around the office at 5:45 and everybody was gone. I felt like I was leaving in the middle of the afternoon. It turns out they were all leaving at 5:45. And I came across one of our colleagues, I won't name him, reading the paper with his feet up. I said, "What are you doing?" He had 3 kids. His wife worked full time. He said, "I prefer to come home when dinner's on the table. It's less hectic." I almost strangled him. But the world has changed a lot in the last 35 years. It really has. And you look out there at your employees, this is an infrastructure issue. This is not a personal issue. This is about how we can keep our economy growing and thriving and how we can raise healthy, safe kids of whatever your socioeconomic background. This impacts all of us, and we need to approach it as an infrastructure issue, just the way we support the roads and the bridges and the highways, because guess what? Your employees can't show up for work. Talk to anyone trying to schedule a hospital. It's not just women, it's men and women and families, and grandparents are involved now, and everybody's involved. Who's going to take care of the kids? I can remember driving back from Keene for a late planning board meeting with tears streaming down my face. Somebody needs to take care of the kids. And I'm not proud. I had dropped him off at the daycare with a fever. So needless to say, the call came in, the baby needed to be taken home. First, they called my mother, the state senator, who went and picked him up and brought him home, took care of him, and then she had to go vote. So then they called my father, the law partner, and he had to come home and take care of the baby until everybody could get home. Brad was in LA for depositions, and I just remember thinking, this is crazy. How is this going to work? And luckily now, they're great, 35, 32, they're doing great. But nothing has changed. Nothing's better. Nothing's easier. And we gotta do it, because guess what? They're not going to have kids. They can't afford it. And then our state and our country is really going to be at a loss. So that's my pitch.
Well, we always say that childcare is not just a family issue. It's a business issue.
It's a business issue.
Business issue. And if we can't get people to come to work, then the work's not going to be done. So that's why.
Well, and that's why I went to work for Tom Rath and Young, because I would have been even harder where I was. You had to just hide that you had children. I do remember, by the way, and I don't know if anybody's here from cable television, but this was funny. So I worked 4 days a week, and then on Fridays I tried to make some semblance out of our life. And I was on a conference call on a Friday, and I was literally in a closet, and the people in the conference call are saying, "Are there children there?" And I said, without batting an eye or lying, I said, "Oh, our law firm's next door to a Catholic school or something?" Not that I was there, but they didn't even know I had kids till the kids were 7 years old. Like, it was just the best kept secret, but you can't keep that up. That's crazy.
You know, you mentioned about the low, very low unemployment rate. We hear it from every business leader. You pick the industry, they'll say the same thing.
It's across the board.
Workforce shut. Mm-hmm. Is there anything that Congress can do that they haven't done yet to address this?
100%. So a number of things, but let's start with the obvious, which is immigration. One of the reasons for the workforce shortage is that, and New Hampshire is such a great example, we have always welcomed immigrants. That's how my family got here. My great-great-grandfather came to work in the Amoskeag Mills from Scotland, and his son became governor. That's our American dream story. That's how we've always done this. And we have reached a point with this discussion, and I want to put in a plug for the New Dem Coalition, because we've put out a whole bipartisan approach to immigration. We can solve this. We can get order at the border and get pathways to citizenship. And there are a number of executive order steps that the president is taking right now. The dreamers, that should be a no-brainer. These people know no other life. And by the way, the definition of a dreamer is someone born here to immigrant parents, but they also have to have either a job or finish college or, be stable before they get that status. The Senate came up with a bipartisan bill, and it could have happened. And I think that's one of the things that we will get done in an orderly way next session. I definitely think that's high on the list. And I think the business community is stepping up. We have discussions with the Business Roundtable. Look, this is now impacting the entire country. I'm just back from Silicon Valley in California for a week, and sitting down, you talk to Tim Cook at Apple, and they've got the same problems. They need engineers, they need PhDs, and that's, by the way, where that idea came from the former president the other day. And he's not wrong, but as soon as he said it, he had to retract it. We should attach a green card to every diploma in the country. I mean, we're educating the world and insisting that they go home. That's crazy. Who would do that? And so we've got to solve that. And then beyond that, what we've tried to do is tackle the job training. I talked a lot about mental health and addiction, getting people back into the workforce. I mean, New Hampshire lost, 10,000 workers to addiction, and so we've got to do better with that. But I also think we've got to do better with job training. My favorite visits beyond the housing are the technical education in the schools. And Amy Slattery is smiling because we did a lot of these together. But the work that the New Hampshire College and University Council does by bringing in the community colleges, but that can start at the high school level. And many, many communities from Salem and Nashua up to Lebanon and all across my district have this, where young people, they can get, just to use an example, the first level LNA, the first level nursing coming out of high school. And then they can get paid while they're in high school, working in a nursing home or in a hospital, to go back to the community college to get the next level and keep going up, up, up. My sister-in-law did this and is a nurse practitioner, had an incredible career up in Gorham. And so it helps to solve the workforce issues, particularly in rural New Hampshire, but it also helps these people to get ahead and to do better, because this workforce issue is a problem at every level, but part of it is the changes in our economy. And I'm sure BAE and others, the banks and Eversource and others are feeling this. The level of sophistication of the technology, of even an entry-level position, what people need to know. We've just been out talking about AI and machine learning and all of this. Like I always say, I'm peering into the future when I go out there to California. People need a different set of skills than, us learning to type in high school. That's not going to cut it. And so I think Congress can invest in all of that.
We've seen an incredible advancement in clean energy. Yeah. And through the Inflation Reduction Act, a substantial amount of money going in. Do you see any of the results here in the state?
Yes, we were just talking about it. So I've gotten very involved. This is sort of an obscure issue for most people, but so again, I'm on energy and commerce and do a lot on clean energy. Hydro, we have 9,000 dams. And the big dams along the Connecticut River are incredible, clean energy and a tremendous resource. We're lucky to have it. We can do better with these other dams by retrofitting turbines in dams all across the country. And I'm working with a fascinating group of the dam owners and the environmentalists and the energy companies who have come together. A friend of mine from Dartmouth, Dan Riker, has started this called an uncommon dialogue, but it's bringing the different sides of an issue together to kind of move forward. And they've just started this with solar. And we have siting issues, we have transmission issues, we have local government issues. You know, people are approaching it in different ways. If you go to Vermont, they've filled up all their fields with solar. We didn't do that, and I'm fine that we didn't, because then you reach a limit on that. But think of what we can do with rooftops. And, you know, I remember going down to Budweiser, that building is so big in Merrimack. And I said, my God, imagine what you could be doing here. So there's a lot that we can do. The IRA is certainly a fantastic place to start with the funding that went out. And new technologies. We've got to do better. We were just talking about these small nuclear. You know, New Hampshire, we don't talk about it a lot, but we're awfully lucky to have the nuclear as 50% of our portfolio. And let me just tell one quick story about clean energy, because, you know, for those of us who believe in this, these weather events that are causing such damage, such consternation, and real impacts on our communities, we can and we will make a difference. We will solve this. But again, back to some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle who just simply don't believe it. The disinformation campaign around this issue is going to have a devastating impact on our country and our community and the globe. But I went to Dubai to the COP, the International Climate Conference, which was unbelievable and fascinating. And we were on a delegation of 10 Republicans and 6 Democrats from our committee. And we were having bilateral meetings with 14 different countries. It was fascinating. And all of the countries of any size or shape, any part of the world, were all totally in on meeting their climate goals for 2030 and 2050. And we're doing this in solar, and we're doing this in wind, and this in geothermal, and this in hydro. And Norway in hydro, they don't even need the offshore oil. They're 99% hydro. But during every meeting, my Republican colleagues would speak up and ask the strangest question. I couldn't figure out what was going on. They would say, well, how do you convince your constituency that this is the right thing to do? And the parliamentarians would go, what? They look out the window. Like, what are you talking about? And afterward, I spoke with the leader of our delegation from North Dakota, and he said, Annie, I have a Trump plus 37 district, that 37%. He said, I can't go home and talk about clean energy. And I was just so stunned. And we've got to deal with this. If 40% of the people, or 40% of my colleagues, don't believe that this is happening, and we had the auto companies in for a hearing on electric cars. And, you know, electric cars aren't perfect, and we have not built out the infrastructure. And you'd have to talk to the governor about that, because the federal funding is available. It was in that bill. We should be doing it. We've been talking about it for a long time. But, you know, we need to get this done so that the auto companies are saying to us, here are our plans to do this and to do that. And our Republican colleagues, every time they speak, they say, you don't have to do that. This is a hoax. You don't have to. And they're looking at them like, no, we're trying to sell cars. Like, what are you doing? And I'm just saying, we've got to figure out how to get past this disinformation, because it's you know, it's a problem. If the rest of the world believes it's happening, China's going to eat our lunch on this one. We're going to get left way behind, and there's so many jobs. It's a win-win-win. We can invest, get fantastic jobs, get lower energy rates. We don't talk about that enough, how much we pay for energy. The rates will be lower, and we'll save the planet. And I think we need to talk about it more from the business perspective. And all of these issues, hopefully you hear a theme here that in my leadership of the New Democrat Coalition, it's bringing the business community into these conversations. Because look, I have lefty colleagues that just want to scold you all, and I don't like it either, let's be honest. Let's look at it from a practical, pragmatic perspective. Let's look at these issues on how we can come up with win-win-win bipartisan solutions. One of my favorite colleagues on the other side of the aisle is an incredibly nice guy named John Curtis, who has a primary today in Utah for the U.S. Senate seat being vacated by Mitt Romney. And I really, really hope John wins. He's just one of the nicest people in all the world. And he started the Conservative Climate Caucus. And he was so excited, he came up to me on the floor and he said, Annie, I got 70 members to sign up for the Conservative Climate Caucus. And I said, John, that's awesome. And he said, yeah, and they had to acknowledge that climate change is happening and that it's caused by human activity. And I said, that's amazing. And then I thought to myself, doing the math as fast as I could, oh my God, John, there are 160 members who don't believe that. And I guess so. That's what he's up against.
I was reading recently, the number may have changed, but 54 House members have decided not to seek re-election. That's like 1/8 of the total body. That's not
highly unusual. No. It really isn't.
The number doesn't bother me.
Yeah.
What bothered me was the names of the people. They were rising stars, they were committee chairs, and they were longtime serious legislators. Mike Gallagher was 40 years of age.
Kathy McMorris Rogers, she's amazing.
Rogers,
Chair
Ken
of
Buck,
Energy and
John
Commerce.
Sarbanes, Patrick McHenry, the chair of the Financial Service Committee, is quoted as saying, it's dysfunctional, the institution. That's why people are leaving. Why are you leaving?
Oh, this is the hard part of the conversation. When you lead in with it that way.
Yeah, I just
I have so many answers as to why, but okay. Let me tell you the series of answers. The reason why I'm leaving right now is because I am trying to fix that. So that sounds disjointed, but as chair of the New Democrat Coalition, we have an official side that's 10 task forces on all these issues that we're talking about, plus AI and trying to get my brain around that one. But we also have a political side, and I have spent the last year and a half traveling the country, recruiting candidates and raising resources to win back the House in November. I say my North Star is Speaker Hakeem Jeffries and Majority Leader Catherine Clark. And I realized heading into the spring, as I talked to my team about my own election, my seat is only a D+1 seat. I shaved a point to Pappas. We can thank the governor for that. He didn't give me 150,000 new constituents, but he actually balanced it. And I didn't want to put my own seat at risk. This is deep in the weeds, but my colleague Sean Patrick Maloney, when he ran the DCCC last cycle, lost his own seat. And I didn't want to do that to my colleagues. So I've been very fortunate that a good friend and a longtime elected official, Colin Van Ostern, has stepped up to run for that seat. There is a primary. We don't need to get into it, but I feel very confident that the seat will be held and that we'll have a very competent person. The deeper part of the story, first of all, 12 years, that should be a good stretch, and I want to set an example for members of Congress that that's a good tenure, that they don't need to stay into their 80s. If I stayed, I'd be turning 70 in office, but I made the mistake of saying that to my colleagues, and they said, oh, I'm 80. Oh, I'm 84. And I said, yeah, that's what's wrong with the place. I'm pretty sure there are people younger than us that can figure out how to regulate AI. So that's a big part of it. My husband's been retired for 3 years, and we want to go skiing and be on Newfound Lake. And have her. I had originally said, when I started thinking about it, take care of my grandchildren. I don't have any grandchildren, and I'm not trying to make any announcements here. But I'm praying for grandchildren. But a part of it, to be honest, among friends is, I think most of you know my story from January 6th. I'll tell this story this way. When I was out in California, we went to a big fundraiser for the president, and Barack Obama, the former president, was with him, and we got to do a photo line. And only in New Hampshire do you have these kinds of relationships, because first Joe Biden was so excited to see me because he's so grateful that we saved him in January thanks to Jim Demers and others, and we saved the New Hampshire primary. That's one of my big wins here. He was very excited, but it turns out Barack Obama was also very excited. I hadn't seen him in a long, long time. And we're taking the picture, and you have about a nanosecond to get the picture before you move on. And he turned to me and he said, "Why are you leaving?" I was like, "Oh, shoot." And I said, "Mr. President, they tried to kill me once. I'm not available for it again." And he looked at me with this expression, and then I walked off. So who knows what I left him thinking. But seriously, I'm a witness and a victim of history, and I came within 30 seconds of those thugs being in that hallway, and I don't know what would have happened to us. I can't predict. They would have pulled us limb from limb, but I do know that if anything had happened to the five of us trying to escape across that hallway, you all wouldn't have woken up to the certification of the election of President Joe Biden and the historic Vice President Kamala Harris that day. And that weighs very heavy on me. I've tried to convey that. I think people here know that story, but that story is not well known. A lot of people across our country don't understand how close we came. And it has impacted my ability to work with my colleagues. It's a combination of the people who came in way back 2018, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, Matt Gaetz. They're not there to legislate. They never were. Marjorie Taylor Greene was stripped of her committees. I don't even think she cares. Now she has more time for rabble-rousing. And all of the work that I did in a bipartisan way has become much, much more difficult for me because I can't tell which of these people tried to kill me or whether they cared. I've tried to talk with my colleagues about it. And so I don't mean to make any of you more depressed about it. That's not my point. My point is that a younger person with energy and enthusiasm like Colin can come in and do this job in a way that they can work across the aisle and get it functioning again. I do think this election is extremely important. I will do everything in my power that the former president never serves again. I think he's a threat to our democracy, straight up. I think he's a threat to our economy, to our way of life, to our ability to love thy neighbor. And I'm hoping that after November, that we will get to a place where young people want to serve again, where people are excited to serve again. And I'll just end on a positive note. I've had such an incredible year meeting these candidates all across the country, talking to them on the phone every day, every week. I can be a mentor to them. I can help them. It's a very difficult thing to do. I think Jeannie and Maggie and Chris Pappas and Chris Sununu and I have made this look easy in a certain way. We enjoy it. We're people, you know, we're optimists. We like what we're doing. But it actually is a very challenging thing to do. And in the environment we're in, I don't talk about this often, but with death threats against me, against my family, it makes it much, much more difficult. And so I want to be out there encouraging these great candidates, and they're smart, smart people. You know, these women have grown up, they've had Title IX since they were born. They are, you know, fly Air Force carriers and helicopters, and they're doctors, and the men are heartfelt. They have beautiful families. They're working hard to make the world a better place. And to me, there's a whole nother generation represented by Hakeem Jeffries, by Catherine Clark, that can take the reins and help to turn our country around and help to get us back to the place where we were when I started. You know, it's been an amazing experience. It's been an incredible opportunity. I'm grateful to all of you for the support that I've had. You know, we live in a very special place, and we choose presidents, and we get a chance to be a part of that, and I think we will continue to be a part of that. And I hope that we think wisely about what's happening in our country and how we can right the ship, basically. And work in a way that's across the aisle the way we do. You don't know at the lacrosse field who's Republican and who's Democrat, nor do you care. It's whether they love their family, whether they're going to come to the parade, whether they're going to, you know, take care of their neighbors. And let's get back to that.
You know, this past year, Congress passed, I think, 34 bills in 23. And favorability of the House is about 15%. You're optimistic that the new crop that's coming in will be able to work around the rampant polarization that is existing right now in Congress, and work on issues like the debt, which is just out of control. The debt right now, the highest expenditure in the budget is Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and then it's defense.
And the tax cut.
And
Don't leave out the $3 trillion tax cut. I mean, that's...
But we're almost at 670, billion that we're spending on the interest on the debt, and it's just eventually it's going to exceed defense. And you think your colleagues, whether it's Hakeem, Johnson, are they going to address that eventually?
They have to. I mean, I think, we've been in a stretch where the economy was growing, and depending on the economists that you talk to, they have not previously been as concerned about it. But when the interest rates go up the way they have, then it obviously weighs on everyone, for sure. I think the big change next cycle, and by the way, we were successful. We say 34 bills, but New Dems played a role in making sure that we got ourselves out of the debt ceiling debacle last spring, a year and a half ago, made sure we kept the doors of the government open. There were 3 times that our colleagues wanted to shut down the government, and passed the historic package to Ukraine and Israel and the civilians in Gaza. Every time it was the 100 New Dems that put up the votes with the Republicans to get that done, and worked in a bipartisan way. If you look back at the 34 votes, it'd be really interesting to compare. I met Speaker Johnson a few months ago, and I introduced myself, and I said, I'm Annie Kuster, chair of New Dems. I said, we're the ones that vote with you when you get anything done. And he said, oh, I know who you are. And it was true. Like, literally, the only times that we functioned are when we came together. And that's the model that's got to prevail. And I think it will, Hakeem and Catherine will approach it that way, because even winning back the majority, it'll still be a narrow margin. Like, we're not talking about, going back to the Tip O'Neill days. I think we will, be able to bring people together And I think by winning in November, we'll make the point that the Marjorie Taylor Greenes and the Lauren Boeberts are not prevailing, nor are the loudest on the Democratic side. The New Dems is growing, the center is growing, we're having a bigger voice, a bigger, when I first came to Congress, I think New Dems had 30 or 40 members. We just had our 100th member. And I think we're taking on a more prominent role with Hakeem and Catherine are classmates of mine from 2012. They see the value in this. And, in some ways it'd be fun to stay and work on it. But I'll be behind the scenes getting it done. Turns out I'm just tired of elections, being on the ballot myself 7 times in the last 14 years. But I love the process, and I love helping these other candidates get there.
So the final question is, what advice would you give your future colleague that will be assuming the position, he or she? And also, if President Biden called you between now and Thursday and said, Annie, tell me what you think I should highlight.
Yeah, Thursday. So I think the advice is what we've talked about in the bipartisanship, is figure out a way to be effective. One thing that's been great working in these bipartisan task forces is that we only endorse the bills that have sponsors from both sides of the aisle, and that's really the way you move forward. I mean, 12 years, I've had every combination, Republican president, Democratic Senate, Republican House, and every version of that. Only once did we have Democratic president, House, and Senate, and even then the margin was 1 vote in the Senate. So you have to do that in a bipartisan way, and I would encourage them to work that way, and that's the way we can get the institution functioning at a high level again. In terms of what I would tell the president, it's similar. It's speak to everybody. Don't leave anybody out. The problem with the partisanship is it forces us into a more partisan posture as well. And, I like to tell my colleagues, they're shocked when they hear it, but I love my district. It's 30% Democrat and 30% Republican and 40% undeclared, independent. And I think approaching it that way, the country is more like that. The country is very evenly divided. It is challenging. But I think speak to everybody. And I think the former president is drumming up his base, but he's losing voters in the middle, the independents. The conviction may have, on 54 counts, may have drummed up those small dollar contributions, but it's giving other people pause. Like, do we really want a convict in the White House? Is that where we want to go? And I think, I think President Biden needs to not swing for the fences to the left. Just talk to everybody and relate to people through their experience. All of these things that I've been talking about, addiction, mental health, housing, childcare, education, everybody's dealing with this. People aren't asking for too much. They just want to be able to raise their family and have a decent job and retire with dignity. It's kind of basic. And we make it really, really hard for people. And I think he's the person that has that compassion, Joe Biden. And I think he'll be fine. I have spent actually quite a bit of time with him lately. Maggie Hassan and I had the most unusual experience ever. We were flying back from one of his recent visits a couple of months ago. And usually if they invite you to fly on Air Force One, you sit back in your own area and then he comes to say hello. And we got on the plane and he said, no, he wants you to come up. So we went up to that conference table that you've seen on TV. And we chatted with him for an hour and a half, the two of us. It was unbelievable. There was nobody else there. I'm like, what is happening here? Surely you have important things you need to be doing. And I think what it was, they said to us afterward, they said that's the best way for him to relax is to be with other electeds and to hear what's going on. Otherwise he's in a bubble, he's surrounded by staff, he's giving, but they don't know. We know. And he literally asked us every detail about every race and what are people thinking and how are they feeling. And he knew everything about New Hampshire, which was fun. He's been running here since Zach was born. I was pregnant with my son 35 years ago in 1988 when I went to my first Joe Biden for president event. But he is uniquely situated with this compassion. He has a lot of politicians come and go through New Hampshire, and we love them or we hate them, and we welcome them with open arms. But I think if he talks with his full heart, I am not concerned about his capacity. Seriously, for an hour and a half, we were talking foreign policy, we were talking domestic policy. He was in the weeds on this stuff. I think what is noticeable now, and this happened out in LA when he spoke, his stutter is more noticeable, which is sort of incredible when you think about the fact that he's had this entire career with a pretty severe disability. And I think that's become more noticeable, but it's not his memory or his capacity. Mm-hmm. And you can judge for yourself on Thursday, but that's my upfront, personal experience with it. He looks older. He is older. He's a little stiff walking. And I think it's interesting because the former president projects in a, more manly way or something, like subliminally in our brain. We're thinking, oh, he looks robust. But I have a feeling from hearing him lately that there's something going on there. And we'll see how he presents. But if he uses any of these lines that he's using regularly in his rallies, I think the American people are going to be like, wait, what? What was the one the other day? He wanted the immigrants to fight? That's just bizarre. That's crazy. Anyway, I'm trying not to be political. I'm sorry.
Well, with that, we just want to thank the Congresswoman not only for being here today, but her 12 years of extraordinary service to our nation. Needless to say, she's reflected so well on her constituents here, and as she is referred to as a common sense Democrat. And boy, do we need more common sense, elected members. Yeah. And she personifies what a good legislator should be. She's serious, she's thoughtful, and she's there to make a difference. And I've often said about Annie that she's somebody who goes to Washington to make a difference, but not a name. Some people go to Washington to make a name, and I think we have that with so many other people in Congress. They become celebrity members rather than serious, thoughtful legislators. And that's what we need more of, who will be willing to cross the aisle. She demonstrated that for 12 years, and I know that New Hampshire's proud. We're proud. That's one of the reasons why we're going to honor her with some 1,800 of her closest and dearest friends in September to say thank you for your faithful service to our nation. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim. And thank you. Thank you